Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Hello there, everybody. Hello there, everybody. This is Guineith Isaac speaking, filling in for Vincent Finelli. He has stuff going on this week around about the place, so he asked me to fill in for him because he was, he had things going on. So here I am. And I'm on air today. If you want to call in, then the number is 866-582-9933. We'd love to take your call. Nathan is engineering the broadcast, and our guest today is Rick Scheben. Are you there, Rick? Hello, Rick.
Hear me?
Hello, Rick.
Hello?
How are you? Hello. Are you there, Rick?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. I have absolutely no idea what you want to talk about today. This is quite short notice. So I'll let you take the lead, and you begin talking about whatever it is that you had lined up for today. For the topic.
Well, let me give you a little background on myself, Guineith, and then I'll tell you what Vince and I were going to speak about. And that is, I wrote a book on the financial, economic, social, and political reasons why we need to be more self-sufficient as American people or Australian people. Yes. I live off-grid, and basically going back to nature, living below your means, knowing the fine line between needs and wants. But I do a lot of reading on financial and economic issues and the psyops behind it. And one of the things that we were going to talk about today is basically the elite template or blueprint, playbook, however you want to, or flowchart, however you want to describe it, for the destruction of the Western world and especially America. And one of the things, I want to qualify and put in context of this flowchart and make people be aware that the MO of the elite is to distract, dumb down, and divide the American people by groups. Every group possible: race, gender, sex, religion, ideology, generation, philosophy, you name it, because they do not want synergy. And that's why half the time we hear race baiting, sex baiting, gender baiting questions from the mainstream media. And of course, the mainstream media's job is to manufacture perception, pity, guilt, and ideology. And that's why there's only 5 companies that control 95% of the information that's out there. And it's not just TV, radio, magazine, and newspapers that are owned by these elitists, but it's production companies and publishing companies as well. For example, I get many offers to do reality shows and documentaries on off-grid living and things, but it's all scripted. And I told them...
And they want to make you look bad.
Well,
they
absolutely.
They want to make you seem to be the kook.
Absolutely. Because they want to teach our generations coming up, Guineith, about how to push buttons, manage paper, and be politically correct. They want to cultivate followers and not thinkers.
Yeah.
So this PC playbook, how I defy it, is basically standing for principle, and that is having the same rules, laws, and accountability for everybody in American soil, saying the truth and be willing to have the guts to be hated for it. And if somebody does something and has less consequences for their behaviors because of what group they're from, that means we should all do it. And group identity politics is really their home run pitch. And they use Hegelian dialectic, professional wordsmithing, media propaganda. In other words, we've been force-fed a sandwich from Marxist, Alinsky, Frankfurt School, Cloward and Piven, Communist Manifesto, and we're so drunk on the Kool-Aid.
And a big dose of Machiavelli in there, too.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Yep.
So when you have a special tiered system of different rules, laws, and accountabilities based on what group you're in, what it does is lower the bars of standards and expectations. So you're insulting the work ethic, the ability, and the intelligence of every person that's shoved into this group, which degrades and disrespects the people. And there's no chance of synergy. So when the elite says your group can't compete, your group's work is suboptimal, you don't empower a nation by lowering the bars of standards and expectations. You basically degrade it, and especially the people in those particular groups. And if you say anything, their job is to make you submissive and break your will. And that's why they have politically correct buzzwords that's been hijacked by definition, like racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobe, intolerant, violent, hater with an anti in front of any word and an isn't, ist, or phobia in the back of any word. And that's why we need to stand up to this, because they go after the individual when they can't win, and they demonize, they discredit, they delegitimize the individual. And that's why the mainstream media loves satire and banter, because they can't have honest intellectual discussions.
Conversation.
Exactly.
They automatically begin to lose as soon as we put in reasoned arguments. And if you wanted to take it back to a kid level, okay, there's this movie out there which was made after a video game called Angry Birds. And the main character is a fellow called Redbird, and he has to go into anger management therapy because he's angry. But the thing is, he gets doubly angry when the piggies show up and start wanting to steal all the eggs. And what he says is, you're not asking basic questions. Everybody's going all the politically correct, we should accept the piggies, they don't really want to do us harm, we have to be hospitable to the piggies, and in reality, the pigs want to take their children away, which are their eggs, of course, because they're birds. And he says, well, you're not asking basic questions. Why are these people here? How many of them are there? And, when are they going away? I heard that. That was more or less a direct quote from the movie. If anyone wants to have 90 minutes of mindless entertainment, they should go on to their favourite movie download site and download Netflix or whatever of Angry Birds. Watch it with grown-up eyes and look at the signals that it's putting out. Because, something, one of their rules is that they have to show you everything that they're going to do before they do it, and you have to consent to it. I don't know if you'd heard that one, but apparently on some Masonic level that they've all sworn an oath to show us exactly what they're going to do before they do it, and that we have to actually consent to all this stuff happening. And mostly they define our consent by our lack of protest against whatever it is they want to do. In other words, if we don't object, then they're going to go ahead with their plans. But as soon as we object and begin to make a fuss, they have to shelve that plan, at least for the moment, and maybe come at it again a generation or a few years later.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. And that's why I always say silence equals consent. And that's why we all need to research, read, share information, grab a microphone, however you decide to do it. Because when we lower the bars of standards and expectations, whether it be Australia or America or any Western country, you're destroying the country because you reward mediocrity based on these politically correct buzzwords like equality, fairness, tolerance, diversity, prosperity, inclusiveness. And I'll be honest with you, when you really look at the numbers, Guineith, there's no prosperity for the bottom 93%. In fact, the middle class is losing a ton of ground. It's all Hegelian dialectic and political correct wordsmithing. And so when you destroy Western countries by rewarding mediocrity for decade after decade after decade. Ingenuity, productivity, and innovation has been thrown out the window with the baby in the bathwater. In other words, the only people who can benefit from the ingenuity, the productivity, and the innovation are the elites who have the capital resources, who have the connections, who have basically paid off the system from the top down through corruption and manipulation, and that's what we have.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree there. And, in Australia, I'll tell you how it works. If you are on a government payment and you want to get off that government payment and actually make an independent living for yourself, I know this because I went through this a few years ago. You have a net loss in that year that you go off the government payment of around about 20%, okay? Which means that you have about 20% lower income in that year. No matter how much money you bring in that year, you will be 20% worse off in the year that you go off the government payment. And that is absolutely remarkable. And when I went to my local church and announced that I was going off the dole, I didn't want to be on any government payments anymore. I'm still on the family tax benefit, which is the cheque that practically every family in Australia receives to help to support the upbringing of their children, okay? And this was the payment that was announced worldwide that they were going to require vaccines for the children. Now, if the government wants to compel me to vaccinate my children, I'm going to make them sign liability for any medical and health problems that my children have. I've already told the school this when they tried to pull this one on me, that my sons attend, that they have two male cousins and both of them are severely autistic, and one of their male cousins is the most severely autistic child in the state. And although he's now in his mid-20s, he lives in a psychiatric ward in isolation in an unfurnished room because as soon as any furniture gets put in his room, he smashes it.
Oh, boy.
He's that autistic. And if they want to force me to vaccinate my kids... Hello, this is Guineith speaking, filling in for Vincent Finelli, Guineith Isaacs. Hello, this is Guineith Isaacs speaking, filling in for Vincent Finelli. I have with us on air today Rick Scheben, and we were discussing government payments and how they want to keep everybody enslaved into their system. And a major way that they do that is by dividing and conquering and by keeping everybody dependent on the state. And that will ultimately, in America, do what they've been doing in Australia, which is using the government payments as a lever of fear to get people to do stuff like vaccinate their children, when we all know that the vaccines contain aluminium, mercury, cancer cell lines, aborted baby parts, yada, 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 yada. Yeah, Rick, that's where we left off, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I know you're filling in for Vincent in the last minute, Guineith. We were going to talk about fascism, and we talked about that last week, because that's what fascism really is. When you talk about government dole, the big fascist corporate oligarchies that have created an alliance with big government that's protected by the mainstream media and the court system, like today's attorneys and judges, that's what fascism really is. And let me just mention a couple of examples. The big, like Bezos from Amazon, he gets $1.48 from taxpayer money for each box that's shipped. Nestle went to California a few years ago for a $500 permit, stole 27 million gallons of water from California when local farmers couldn't even legally punch in a well and they had to let their farms literally die off. See, this is what fascism is. Yeah, and people need to realize that the whole definition is being changed. We're in the book-burning era of the Western world. For example, the post-2009 definition for fascism is something like this: right-wing ideology or a movement that's fundamentally opposed to democracy and liberalism. First of all, folks, people need to realize that liberalism has been hijacked by the globalists. It's not liberal anymore, okay? They're using this as the guise. The correct definition, which is pre-2009, is a system of government marked by totalitarian dictatorships for social and economic control and the suppression of opposition by the system and suppression of opportunity. And that's where the big corporate oligarchies and big government has created an alliance, and they're in bed together. And that's why they love high regulations. They love high minimum wage laws. They love lobbying, because the small and medium-sized businesses can no longer compete with that. So we need to realize that everything is being changed from the top down, and opportunities for everybody is being thrown out the window. And this is why one of the reasons, many reasons, that I live off-grid and make my own electricity, try to harvest my own food, from produce to meat and everything in between, because we can't control our own destiny. The bottom line is there is a looting. We're in the looting stage of corporate America by big government, the MSM, and the court systems, and it's all against the bottom 93%. There's a coup against the bottom 93% of people to govern themselves. Guineith?
Yep, I like Mussolini's definition of fascism. It's the merger of state and corporate power.
There you go.
And he ought to know. One of the most famous self-defined fascists of the 20th century. He called himself a fascist. And when people said to him in press releases, and what does that mean to be a fascist? Because the Italians actually really, really liked Mussolini. They thought he was great. He said, it's very simple. It's the merger of state and corporate power. And do you know what it ultimately boils down to? It's rule by the mafia. That's ultimately where it goes. And that suited the Italians just fine, because that's how they've been living forever. But it doesn't suit the rest of us at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm not... I thought I heard the break music. Are we heading into a break there?
It sounds like we are, Guineith, and I will address what you said after the break.
Hello, everybody. This is Guineith Isaac speaking here. I'm filling in today for Vincent Finelli, and I have on the air with us Rick Scheben, and we were just about to get into a discussion about fascism.
All right. Are you ready for me to address what you said, Guineith?
I'm ready.
Awesome.
Fire away.
Hey, I'm just curious, where are you calling from Australia right now?
I'm calling from Australia. I live in country, but it's probably just after 12:30 at night.
Oh my! So you're drinking beer and I'm drinking coffee. Very cool.
I'm having a cup of tea.
Okay.
Is what I'm doing. Mostly, grog is out of the question. Simply because, for one thing, I'm a single mum and I'm a widow, and I've got so much going on in my life. I think probably if we were in a very financial state, one stout a day would go down really nicely. But there's other things that take a higher priority in my life rather than spending my money on alcohol.
Well
said.
Yeah.
Yep. That's just how it is.
well said. And I think I was tongue-in-cheek there, but I want to say before I continue
that's fine.
I want to say I'm sorry for your loss. And, it's time doesn't stop for no person, so we got to keep moving forward, absolutely.
That's right. Well, my husband died when my youngest son was 3 months old, and he's now 14 years old.
Oh.
And it has been non-stop battles the whole way with state-run pedophile cartels. That means the Child Protective Services.
Mm-hmm.
And it is also non-state-run but state-protected pedophile cartels, meaning the creepy people across the way who want to kidnap your kids on the way to school.
Yeah, it's really sad.
We had, when I was living in Geraldton in Western Australia, we had 6 abduction attempts in 4 years on my boys. That's pretty well the reason why we're no longer living in Geraldton, Western Australia, despite the fact that my whole family comes from there. And we have, or my mother's side of the family anyway, I've got a lot of my dad's family in Perth. But you know, when we have a family get-together in Geraldton, the family has to hire out the local Returned Services League hall. I suppose they have a Veterans Affairs League or something like that in the United States.
Yeah.
Where, you know, returned veterans can get together and have a social time and have some beers, reminisce about the war, and maybe get their rights represented.
Yep.
I think that there must be something like that somewhere in the United States.
Well, there are, and President Trump is doing a lot of things for the veterans, which has been totally ignored by the last few administrations. And I'll be honest with you, we need to start if we don't take care of our veterans, our young and our old, then every ounce of humanitarianism has left that particular country. And he's doing a lot of good things. He's doing some things I don't agree with, but all in all, he's trying hard. He's working hard. The man is taking $1 as a salary. He's putting his life and his family's life and safety on the line for this country. He's a multi-billionaire. He doesn't need to be doing this, but he's trying, and we got to give credit where credit is due. And he might be our last shot. So I want to address what you just said, Guineith, regarding when we started talking about fascism. You mentioned Mussolini, and whether it be black shirts, brown shirts, mercenaries, whatever you want to use, Mussolini, Hitler, Mao, Pol Pot, you know, the bottom line is there was over 100 million people killed from this behavior. And when you talk about, I'm going to lump everything together. When you talk about communism, socialism, authoritarianism, dictatorships, totalitarianism, it doesn't matter what semantic, politically correct term you use. It's all top-down, centralized control from a non-governing, non-elected, usually government. And even if it is elected, it's already, the fix was in, and they're all part of the same system. And when I was talking about,
Playbook.
Yeah, absolutely. So to talk about fascism and to see big government and big corporate oligarchies getting away with what they are, and I mentioned earlier about the looting stage of corporate America, which is protected by, again, big government, the MSM, and the court systems. What we have, and I'll just give you an example. So I do a lot of reading on economics because the PSYOP is so interesting to me, because half of what I read is people are trying to sway public opinion, trying to make you think a certain way, that the economy's doing great. And I'm reading stuff where even the last quarter of 2016 was negative GDP. So according to what I'm reading, we are in a recession already, probably heading towards the worst depression America's ever seen. And we have CEOs and CFOs basically using 0% loans or very low percent loans to buy back stocks. They're giving themselves huge bonuses, and they're paying off dividends with that money. They're not reinvesting the money into the company, so they're eliminating the core business model to make everything look good on paper, and I'm doing air quotes here as I say that. So they issue bonds. In other words, they're selling debts. They're saying the credit rating for these bonds are great, like AAA, but they're bundling bad debt and toxic assets with AAA government bonds. And a lot of them are bundled with junk bonds. And then they sell to the public, especially desperate pension funds that are looking for yields, and all earnings are adjusted. Again, I'm doing air quotes. Adjusted.
Yep.
Okay? And that's what, and this is protected by fascism. It's like the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, protects the fraudsters. It's analogous. I was in the pharmaceutical industry for over 20 years. The FDA and the AMA is owned by Big Pharma. And they create laws like Dodd-Frank, which is supposed to stop these credit rating plays, but the SEC allows it. It's supposed to protect the little guy and the little banks, but instead they've gone basically the exceptions, the dodging, the exemptions, the lobbying, the low regulations is only for the big guys and the big banks. So the results for the American people or the Western world is low wages, less good jobs, low small business growth. And when you don't have small business growth to compete against these corporate oligarchies and these monopolies who are literally, and Amazon, I read about it all the time, and Bezos, I mean, defying antitrust laws every hour of the day, there's no chance of an expanding economy. And that's what we're in right now. And these are all examples of fascism. You know, it's just like, I don't know if you read about the Merck CEO who just resigned from Trump's manufacturing council. I read about that this morning. He talks about hatred and bigotry and group supremacy from from what happened in Virginia with the riots the other day. Well, they don't talk about Antifa. They don't talk about Black Lives Matter, which are funded by the George Soros.
Well, they're funded by George Soros.
Exactly, and yes.
You know, when I have a degree in environmental science from the University of Melbourne, which is one of the best universities in Australia. Okay, what I had to study international politics and management. Okay, I had to study global trade systems. Environmental science. Some people might see it as a soft degree. It's not. You have to study everything. You have to know about international politics, trade, treaties, international law. You have to know about the deepest skullduggery of international business because it all goes back to affecting the natural environment. Okay, and what happens is these corporations rape the environment, and then they get a slap on the wrist. But George Soros, back in the day when I was studying, he was in the middle of raping the Malaysian economy. What he did was he bought up pretty well, I think probably something like a third of the Malaysian currency that they had, and within 48 hours he dumped the whole lot onto the international foreign exchange markets, and he deliberately killed the Malaysian economy. And overnight they went from having a first-class standard of living to a third world nation status. Overnight. This man is evil and he's dangerous.
Absolutely, and it's not just George Soros. It's all. We have 8 people in the world. 8. Last year the number was 64. Now it's 8 people own a higher net worth than half of the globe. In other words, planet Earth combined. I mean, we cannot have humanitarian. We cannot have a capitalistic system. We cannot have commerce or an economy until we arrest globalists, especially these NGOs, and put them on trial for sedition, treason, espionage, and they need to be punished. And what I would love to see President Trump do is get rid of his whole cabinet and replace them with average Joe people. These gazillionaires that he's putting in there, they're part of the special interest, and they've been bought and paid for it to have the money that they have. And one of the things I talk about on the air on many different shows, Guineith, is practice what you preach laws. And let me just give you an example what that is. I don't know if you've ever heard me say this on the air, but For example, you can't keep saying hypocrisy, double standards, and that's the way it is. It's not going to work. I'll give you some specificity after the break.
Hello, this is Guineith Isaacs filling in for Vincent Finelli, and I have Rick Scheben with us. And we were discussing, all the things that are wrong with fascism. And I just want to say, Rick, I grew up in a left-wing household, but there used to be on this earth a type of left-wing guy who basically he was involved in the trade union movement. He was often actually a Christian, and he was somebody who basically wanted to crush the power of the corporatocracy and, make sure that the working guy got his fair share. And that was the sort of guy that my dad was, okay? He came from a British blue blood banking family that had been cut off from the main part of the family tree probably around about the mid-1870s, and that was, incidentally, the Bonham Carters. And that is my family. And, the things that they did in their past were truly evil. But I believe that type of socialist now is pretty well extinct. Do you have any comment there?
Well, absolutely. Now we have a rigging of the game, okay? There isn't real economics. There isn't real markets or fundamentals. Look at PS ratios, PE ratios. I mean, every book is cooked. And you look at demographics with the baby boomers retiring and so many good jobs have left the Western world to go to low-cost producing countries. You look at central bank corrupt monetary policies, Keynesian economics, which if I had to define it real quick, it's elite interventionism. It's to keep the status quo. In other words, what I call an incognito caste system. And of course, group identity politics. We have a whole different system right now, and that's part of the fascist top-down centralized control with no accountability from the very top. And this is why we need to have all of us average Joes talking about the rise of political correctness and the fall of the middle class and the inequalities that's occurring. But now we're at the point where the system is so false and phony that there's the left-right paradigm. Only the low-information voter really thinks is a true left-right paradigm. That's maybe 5% of it. It's the aristocracy versus the serfs. And people need to realize that every group, if you don't identify as an American or an Australian or whatever country you're from, and you identify from what group you come from, whether it be victim group status or protection group status, you're destroying your nation because we have to be Americans first. Remember when I talked about lowering the bars of standards and expectations? You destroy America from within because you're rewarding mediocrity, and then ingenuity, productivity, innovation, knowledge, everything that made our countries great has been thrown out the window with the baby in the bathwater. So we have to address options for the people. And one of the things I was going to talk about, practice what you preach laws before the last break. How many times do you hear about the big corporate oligarchies and big government being proponents of Common Core education, yet they send their kids to private schools? How many times do you hear about, we need to get rid of the guns, but yet these same big wigs who are saying this are hiring security to carry guns to protect them, or they're living behind some wall with security who have guns? Or how about carbon footprints?
That's the truth.
Hypocrisy.
Okay, we're heading into a top-of-the-hour break. Hello, everybody. This is Guineith Isaacs here, filling in for Vincent Finelli. He's otherwise occupied this week. I'll be with you all week. I have Rick Scheben with us, and we were busy discussing exactly how things are playing out with the when the fascists begin to gain control of a governmental system, and exactly how they do it. Now, one thing they mentioned in the news, Rick, I would like to get your comment on this. I heard on the news just then, apparently, that a bunch of Antifa people, if you can call them people, they went to Virginia and they went to a public park in Charlottesville, Virginia, and they pulled down tried to pull down a statue of General Lee in a public park. Did I hear that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There was a riot. What were these people thinking? What did they think was going to happen? Did they leave their brains in the glass vat by the bed in the morning? You don't go to the South and go pulling down statues of General Lee. I'm very sorry for laughing, but these people have an IQ of about 80. I don't even live in America, and I know, I've heard of General Lee. I know that the Southerners love him. I know that he stood against Lincoln. And one thing that my dad said when I was a little girl, he was very politically educated. He was just educated full stop. He could speak about 5 or 6 languages, including Russian, by the way. He'd studied political theory his whole life, capitalism, and he'd studied, communist political theory, and he'd studied about World War II and World War I, and he knew about the Crimean War and the Boer War and the American Civil War and the American War. There's very little that my dad did not know. And he said, everybody idolizes Lincoln, President Lincoln. Everybody says what a great man that he was. But what they fail to say is how Lincoln actually did a whole lot of backroom fascist deals on, I think it was the California Railway at the time when he was president, bought up a whole lot of land at peppercorn prices, and then afterwards, to cut a very long story short, made a fortune on building this railway. And basically, a lot of people actually died making this railway line. And I think there was not a documentary, there was a film made about the construction of this railway, Hell on Wheels. I don't know if you've seen that or not. I've seen bits and pieces of it, but apparently it was really brutal, and that was Lincoln actually did that, and it was pure fascism, absolutely pure fascism, and slavery was becoming unfashionable in the South anyway in Lincoln's day, and it probably would have gone out the window within just a few years. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, you bet. There's a lot of things I can comment on. You mentioned quite a few things there, Glenn, but, talking about the mainstream media and their obligation to the elites to sway public opinion and hold on to the narratives, the memes, the themes, the talking points, the microphone. Basically, they want to cultivate followers and not thinkers. And you mentioned Antifa. It's really funny because I've mentioned something similar on the air many times. One of their favorite chants from Antifa and Black Lives Matter is something similar to Trump KKK, no fascist USA. And they chant. It's really it's sad and funny, absolutely. Now, let me just break down that chant. Let me just break this down to show you how every group is being used, and that's why I say the term group identity politics. And that's why I mentioned earlier in the show about the template, the blueprint, the playbook, the flow chart for the destruction by the elites. They create group identity politics to have a different set of rules, laws, and accountability based on what group you're in, and that lowers the bars of standards and expectations, which insults the work ethic, the ability, and the intelligence of everybody in the group, degrades, disrespects, and then it demonizes, discredited, and delegitimizes an individual who talks against it. It's all meant to be submissive and break your will. That's exactly what it's meant to do. So you break down that chant, okay? Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA, or whatever, something similar to what they say. KKK was created by the Democrats and Margaret Sanger. Okay?
That's why I'm laughing.
Okay, and Margaret Sanger, she didn't create
Queen
KKK,
Witch
but
abortion.
the Democrats created the KKK, but Margaret Sanger created, what's that, abortion
Planned
clinic?
Parenthood.
Planned Parenthood,
She's
thank
the Queen
you.
Witch who invented abortion.
And she publicly said,
abortion.
Yes, she publicly said.
I mean, there was abortion for thousands of years, but she established Planned Parenthood.
Yes, and she
and was
literally
Hitler's biggest fan.
Yes, and she literally said publicly, we need to reduce the black population. This is in video, this is in audio, this is in transcript. And Obama, okay, who is a Democrat, doubled black unemployment. And fascism basically has created only 4 to 6% of people having their primary income of being self-employed. So when you really break down this chant, it just shows how distracted, dumbed down, and divided the populace is.
And they're ignorant.
They don't even know what fascism is. They're basically saying no fascism, and they're being bought and paid for. All these groups are being bought and paid for by NGOs and the George Soroses and the fascists. It's almost too stupid to talk about. You know?
Yeah, that's right. That's the truth of it. And you know something? People would, you know, if anybody wants to bag me and say what a racist KKK woman I am, I would say that is as far from the truth as what you can get. Okay. My dad, he was the biggest political influence on me in my life. That was Ted Carter. He lived in Rotorua, New Zealand. Prior to that, he lived in Geraldton in Western Australia. You know something? He would go out when he was in Geraldton, and he would actually build windmills and wells on Aboriginal missions, so these Aboriginal kids who were totally fourth world, dirt poor, had clean drinking water. Okay? And one day when my financial position is better than what it is today, I can't go out and build the wells, but I can pay somebody else to, you know? This is not a person who's racist. If I was racist, I'd say, these dang black fellas, they can have their dirty water and dye colour. I don't care. Well, even there, I'm showing, you know, the prejudice that comes because I'm putting on a southern accent. You know, it's so ingrained, you can't get away from it. But it's you know, I care enough about human beings all over the world to want everybody to have a good life, you know. But these people, I'm sure they have an average IQ of about 80. I think to call them autistic would insult every autistic person out there. And I know a number of autistic people. So my teenage son has got an IQ of about 140. And he wraps his teachers up in knots because they're all this politically correct, fascist, nutcase educational system that we've got here, you know. And because of what I've told him over the years of giving him a political education, I'm sure his teachers hate him because he you know, he can see all the flaws in their logic, you know, and they say stupid things. What sort of stupid things do they say, son? Race is a big one, he says. He says, my other son had a wallpaper which was a whole lot of black men around Barack Obama, and Barack Obama being a homie with the black guys, okay? And his teacher complained that this was a racist wallpaper on his laptop. And I said, who cares? It's satire. It's funny. And it's totally harmless. Okay? And Barack Obama is a traitor to his own people. He absolutely is. You're full on right about him really, really increasing black unemployment. What was that? Oh, yeah, they're really, really nosy. Okay? They want to know everything. And because we have in our family a British blue blood genetic, most British blue bloods are quite tall and quite thin. Okay? And we have a high average IQ. And earlier on this year or late last year, the school teachers tried to accuse me of starving my children. We'll see if it comes up. Hello, this is Guineith Isaacs here. Hello, this is Guineith Isaacs here, filling in for Vincent Finelli. I have Rick Scheben on the line, and we were having a conversation about these terrible, terrible fascists and the things that they do and how they seem to have no common sense and no political education.
Absolutely. And may I address what you just said before the break?
Yep, that's right.
First of all, before I talk about, you mentioned teachers, and your son, I think, mentioned in the background how the number one weapon is race, because I make it very clear that the mainstream media's job is to manufacture perception, pity, guilt, and ideology. But teachers they're basically teaching theory, because most teachers get a job straight out of school. I would like to see teachers have 15 years minimum of successful private sector experience, and I'd sign that bill in a heartbeat. And I'm not saying there aren't good teachers out there, but too many of them are bought and paid for, and they care more about their paycheck and pension, and they need to stand for principle. We need to teach practical experience and not theory from successful private sector teachers. That's what we need. And when your son was talking about race, can you imagine how these elites, these globalists, insult every group out there and basically say in every word, in every way, that your group can't compete. Your group's work is suboptimal. When you do that, you have zero chance of synergy. It's going to be divide and conquer. And what most people, when they say divide and conquer, what they don't say, Guineith, is that it lowers the bars of standards and expectations. I don't care if I say this on every show 500 times, okay? Because lowering the bars of standards and expectations needs to be said just as often as the divide and conquer strategy, because they are the same, a different rail on the same track, traveling in the same direction. They're the same thing. And
that's right.
You cannot expect to reward mediocrity with all these participation trophies, decade after decade after decade, and expect quality of life to go up. And all these politically correct buzzwords like equality, fairness, tolerance, diversity, inclusiveness, prosperity, they're doing the exact opposite. They are basically words that have been used, that have been changed by definition to be used as a weapon against the people. And that's why so many of these late-night shows, even a lot of the mainstream media, they like satire and banter in their television shows, because they can't compete with objective facts and ideas and solutions. And they don't want ideas and solutions. They want people to be under their thumb. And here in America, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but in America, I've mentioned this fact many times on many different shows, Guineith, and this is a very sad state to show the despair that we're in. For people in their low 50s and under, the number one cause of death is drug overdose. This is a nation in despair. And we have to talk about ideas and solutions because we have a new technocracy, a new industrial revolution coming in the form of robotics, automation, and artificial intelligence. And this is going to take millions and millions and millions of jobs, and it's going to continue to lower the quality for the populace, for the people, and increase the profits for the very rich. And that adds to the fascist system. And that's why the elite and the George Soroses and those people have created groups like Antifa, because they're so young and they're so dumb and they don't even know what fascism is. And that's why I talked earlier in the show about how right around 2009, the dictionaries and Googles are literally changing definitions of things like fascism to basically dumb the population down. And we were talking a little... Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like 1984. I said to my boys, listen, have you ever read the book 1984? When I was in high school, it was required reading for 2 or 3 years. In my high school education, each year we would have to read and do a commentary and analysis on 1984 and also Animal Farm. And there were other texts in there as well, because we actually did have a rather socialistic English teacher. They ended up being, we were going to get The Crucible by Alan Miller, but I objected on religious grounds, and I brought up my United Nations right to not be compelled to read anything that I didn't want to read, and it was against my religion. Basically, me being a Christian, and about how it was glorifying what happened at Salem. And I believe that book actually did a great deal of harm, that play, did a great deal of harm, which is to be seen if you go to Salem this day. It's full of witches, and full of witches of the very worst kind. But it's like this. These days, the kids are not getting that type of book to read. They're not getting Animal Farm in the school in this country. They're still on the book list, but they're just somehow not making it into the children's required reading in their English classes. They're not getting 1984. I don't think they're even getting The Crucible.
Oh, I'm Mike Lindell, the inventor of my pill.
They're getting,
like all
Shakespeare's okay, but which ones? There's a lot of politics in Shakespeare. Hello, this is Guineith Isaacs speaking here, filling in for Vincent Finelli for this week. And I have Rick Scheben on air with me. And we were discussing, the texts that kids are studying in schools, and about how they don't seem to be studying texts that will actually teach them about politics in the ways that I certainly did when I was in high school, which was only like 25 years ago or something, not that long ago. Now, one son is reading a book called The Hatchet, which is quite a good book. I've actually read it. Teaches a lot about survival skills through this book. A kid has to survive a year alone in the wilderness after his plane crashes. And the other son is reading Macbeth by Shakespeare. And I just let my son know that he'd better pray for God's protection while he's reading that play, because it's actually a cursed play. And why they would, they could be studying any number of Shakespeare plays that would actually teach them a lot about politics. They could be studying Julius Caesar. They could be studying Hamlet. And they could be studying even Romeo and Juliet. Teaches you about how the mafia operates if you do a study on it that way. But no, it has to be Macbeth, about witches and curses. And this is it makes you want to find the nearest brick wall. You know what I mean? What do you think of that, Rick Scheben?
Well, I'll tell you, that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book on the financial, economic, social, and political reasons why we need to be more self-sufficient as the American people, or Australia, or Western world, or just the globe in general. In other words, living below your means, knowing the fine line between needs and wants. But the point to be made here is that we need to talk financial, economic, social, and political rationale equally. And that's what the powers that be do not want to teach. They want you to be cultivated to be a follower. They want to mold your mind and say you're a racist. This is why they race bait, they gender bait, they sex bait, they ideology bait, religion bait. They're even putting generation against generation. This is all to sway public opinion and hold on to the narrative. And what we need to do is, especially here in America, we have a Bill of Rights and a Constitution. And it's pretty obvious that the globalists want to deteriorate this in every way, shape, and form and delegitimize it. And this is why we need to have shows like Vince Finelli showed, USAPrepares.com, and a lot of really good, I hate the term alternative media. I like the term new media because enough people have woken up, and I think Trump's being elected is just an example of that. But people have to realize, whether it be Antifa, Black Lives Matter, even the Islam community, they're all being used, they're being duped by the elite community, by the fascist community, by the globalists. They're being used. And if people would do some reading, some research, and see how they're being used, especially like Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and when we talked about fascism, and they're even changing the definition post-2009 and totally doing a 180 on it. And people need to realize that we are in the book-burning years of the Western world. And the only way we're going to change things is from the bottom up, and if we do it in mass, because it's very difficult for us little people to get a microphone and to share ideas and solutions. And that's why they're holding on to everything. Everybody in the White House and in the Pentagon, the whole system is against Trump because a lot of these people have been bought and paid for, whether they've been caught laundering money or they've been caught with pedophilia, whatever it is. These people are being protected, and how the elite is changing their minds and making them become conformed is through intimidation, threats, bribery, blackmail, blacklisting, etc. And the little people have to do the reading and research in order to combat all this manipulation and corruption. Guineith?
Yep, that's absolutely true. And that's also, in Australia, one of the primary tools that's being used is blackmail levers, okay? And that is being blown wide open in this country, but it's just not being reported in the dinosaur media. I was going to say mainstream, but it's not. It's lamestream dinosaur media. There's especially a lady by the name of Fiona Barnett, and she was an MK Ultra graduate, okay, and basically apparently got used when she was a child as a child sex slave. She was one of the ones who actually survived, and she grew up and with a great deal of danger to herself is blowing this whole thing wide open, but she's she's an immensely brave lady. If you go to look up her internet site, which is fionabarnett.org, okay, you might not even get it loading properly the first time with Google Chrome. Basically, she blows the whole thing wide open, the whole pedophile cartel. And from my own experience of political people and political families that I've known in Australia, I would say that her assessment is pretty accurate. We also have another media personality here in Australia. His name is Darren Hinch. He was also sexually abused as a child, and he has come out and outed a whole bunch of the pedophiles that have been running this country, including, I think, by memory, back in the day, I think he actually outed George Pell a while back. And gee, didn't that make him popular? I think he actually lost a television show on Channel 9 because of that. It was either George Pell or it was one of these mindless, I think Alex Jones calls them Renfields, that he was a Renfield that had quite a lot of political power and influence. These people are crazy, and they happen to run the show, and they're murderers, and they're pedophiles, and what Alex Jones says about them, he's also immensely brave. He's absolutely right. And, it's just absolutely crazy. And the other thing is, this pedophile cartel seems to be particularly after people with blue blood genetics, okay? And what I mean when I say blue blood genetics, I'm talking about people who have an Rh negative blood type. I was talking about this with Richard Allen Miller. We went a bit into the Rh negative thing. It means that you're descended from the giants. And our family absolutely are. They generally became the nobility in every nation where they settled. They have red hair and or blonde hair, and they have blue or green eyes, and they're very, very tall, and they have probably about a 20% greater or 30% greater average intelligence. And it's because of the gene of the giants, okay, that are mentioned in Genesis chapter 6 in the Holy Bible, okay? One of my son's IQs is over 140. The other one had a brain injury at birth, which dropped his IQ points by about 10. He's got an IQ of about 135, okay? And both of them are really, really, really clever kids. And what was that, son? And Connor, one of my sons is 6'3", the other one is 14 years old, and he's one of the tallest kids in his class, and is also going to grow to be over 6 foot tall. He's 5'11". He's 14 years old and 5'11".
Mm.
So that's this is what I'm talking. That targeting the people like us. The blue bloods, the European blue bloods, the British blue bloods, those with the Rh genetics, we are getting hammered with pedophilia. We are getting hammered with race hate, okay? We're not hateful people. We can't help who our ancestors were, but what it's doing to a lot of unaware people with Rh genetics who are descended from the giants, it is turning them into a hateful type, okay? And it is going to, if they continue on this way, it is going to reignite a whole race-based civil war. And that very thought terrifies me, because I'm going to get caught up in it one way or another, because I won't shut up. And I know what's actually going on, and I'm sure, Rick Scheben, I know that you do as well. And it's us who are the ultimate target of all of this.
Yeah, absolutely, Guineith, and this is why we need to stand for principle. And it's so simple, like when I talked about the practice what you preach laws earlier. If President Trump did this, we can write practice what you preach laws where all these politically correct buzzwords at every level, like racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, extremist, controversial, homophobe, intolerant, violent, hate, all this stuff, we can make it so everybody has the same rule, law, and accountability, and we don't. It's specially tiered for what group you're in. In fact, Dr. Ben Carson came to Northwest Montana years ago, and the first words out of his mouth was, "I hate political correctness." And right after that, he said, when you are politically correct, you turn minorities into victims. So what the elite has done, they've turned the United States of America into the divided groups of America. And I just want to talk about briefly some of the things that you talked about. When a young person has trauma,
we'll pick this up right on the other side of the break. Hello, this is Guineith Isaacs here, filling in for Vincent Finelli. I have Rick Scheben with me, and I would like to just let him talk for this whole last segment of the show, because he's got some really, really important stuff to say. I want all you fellas to really pay attention to him. So fire away, Rick.
Well, Thank you, Guineith. First of all, I just want to comment on some of the things that you said during the last segment before the break. When a young person, boy or girl, has trauma, the probability of a normal life, whether it be from especially pedophilia, but most things, is very low. And you mentioned Alex Jones, and I'll tell you something. I think he's a huge patriot, and he's extremely well-read. He has a lot of guts, and that's kind of what we need right now. We need people and all average Joes to stand up because we need guts right now. I'm not saying we don't need intelligence, a plan of action, things of that nature, but we need guts desperately because the powers that be, I mean, when they can take a word like fascism and create a group that's bought and paid for, especially their top operatives, and it's just like right-wing extremist groups. You know, a lot of these people these groups have been infiltrated by the CIA and other intelligence agencies. And people have to realize that they need chaos. They need infighting for a divide and conquer strategy to work. And as I mentioned earlier, the divide and conquer strategy has everything to do with lowering the bars of standards and expectations, because they have to insult every group out there, work ethic, ability, intelligence. And this is meant to degrade and disrespect every person out there. And you don't empower a nation or a group by lowering the bars of standards and expectations. And this is what we have to realize, because they need to break our will. They need to make us submissive, and that's why they have these politically correct buzzwords like extremist, controversial, racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobe, intolerant, violent, hater, with an ism or an ist or a phobia on the back of every word or an anti in front of every word. We are in a deflationary spiral, folks. This is one of the reasons I always go back to Economics 101. This deflationary spiral is turning into a stagflationary complications for the bottom 93%. We are not going to have the ability to control our own destiny when this thing crashes. And I talk about economy on many shows many times. And if just look at interest rates, they're a function of growth, wages, and inflation. They're all heading south. And this is why, when you, like your sons, Guineith, you told me some of the things that they're reading. Everybody should be reading Economics 101, because that really shows the true direction and propaganda of the fascist, elitist, globalist arm. Because it's very hard to hide interest rates. And that's why I talk about bonds, and that's why I talk about how they're inversely proportional to yields and the cost of the bonds. And when you look at the fact that we're in a debt, credit, subsidy bubble,
yep,
the Western world's not going anywhere. And every young person needs to read Economics 101, because this way you'll be able to see the mask behind the curtain. Guineith?
Yep, that's absolutely true. And they need to learn the difference between Keynes and von Mises in economics. You need to search out those two authors, and you need to study them and compare them. And you know something, it used to be that they divided against the Malthusians and the cornucopians. Okay? It's not that simple. Yes, you can generate your own wealth. What you sow, you will also reap. Okay? If you're lazy and don't do anything, then you're going to suffer. But you know something? We're right at the end of the broadcast.
Yes,
and I feel like I could talk for a whole nother hour on this topic. But unfortunately, it will have to be another day.
It was a pleasure, Guineith.
You know?
Thank you.
As Vincent says, honesty and integrity, the rest is up to you. Have a great day.